Okay, today we're talking about smart and savvy wealth building strategies in today's uncertain economy. And my guest today is Rich Schuette. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and every week we have smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies, and we've had, Netflix and Grubhub and Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's. But check out the archives; lots of great episodes for you to check out there. And of course, before we get into this interview, this episode is brought to you by our company, Rise 25, where we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run your podcast. We are the easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do strategy, accountability, and full execution. In fact, we invented what some are calling the Wix of B2B podcasting. It's our platform podcast Copilot. And so you can learn more about this by going to our website, rise25.com, or emailing us at support@rise25.com. All right, let's get into today's guest. His name is Rich Schuette. He's the founder and CEO of Avalan Wealth Management, based out of Santa Barbara, beautiful Santa Barbara, my former hometown, home of my alma mater. It's a firm that specializes in personalized financial, business, and investment planning for entrepreneurs and other affluent individuals. He's been in the space for over 25 years, and he has got a lot of range of experience, even previous before that, in sales. So we're going to talk about that experience as well. And he's also the host of the Road Already Traveled podcast, where he shares insights from his entrepreneurial journey and interviews with other industry leaders. Rich, such a pleasure to have you here today. And you got such varied interests in a lot of different things. So I'm sure we're going to cover a lot. But I love to start by getting to know my guests and what they were like as a kid. And your grandfather sounds like your grandfather was this kind of larger than life character. And he owned a golf course and taught you at a young age to go out to gather balls, which I love the fact that he owned the course and he was teaching you this like fundamental tool of going out and finding diamonds in the rough, literally. So tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, John, thanks for having me, by the way. This is, I'm looking forward. It's gonna be a lot of fun. It was actually kind of cool. Small correction. My grandfather actually owned a couple of different golf ranges, not courses, but one of them was actually the largest range from the Chicagoland area all the way to the West Coast in the country at the time. So it was kind of a neat thing for him.
That's huge.
Literally, it was.
Wow.
I got pictures in my office of the tee line. He was definitely my mentor, my hero, my inspiration, and honestly, my best friend as a kid. Super cool guy. So, yeah, he had retired. It was his range was in the Chicagoland area, and he had retired because he wanted to move out to California and be close to my dad and me, which was a pretty cool deal. And so from the time that I was really little, he was always a guy that was around, but he just wasn't all those things that I explained, but he was also somebody that was always trying to teach me how to do things that would set me up for my future success. So,
and was he a financially savvy guy in the traditional sense? Had he learned a lot about finances? Sounds like he'd made a lot of money, but where was he in terms of knowledge of like wealth building strategies?
Yeah, he was probably at a 1 out of 100, in terms of mindset around money.
Good at making money, but didn't have the right mindset around it?
No, he just didn't. He was a depression baby, right? He just knew that he needed to make enough to be able to keep going. And then when he got it, he really didn't know what to do with it. So he just he relied on other people to try and help him figure that out, not necessarily always in his best interest. So,
and he actually gave you a subscription to the Wall Street Journal when you're like 10 years old.
He did. That's how they had a house in Malibu. I grew up in Ventura County. And so, it was a 45-minute drive. And so his way of staying in touch with me, as a kid, obviously pre-internet and all that kind of stuff, is he bought me a subscription to Wall Street Journal. And he would call me every day after school and ask me to read him stock quotes.
I love this. Did it ever occur to you that like, wait, Grandpa, why don't you get your own subscription? Or did you like play along?
No, I didn't understand it, right? I mean, obviously
Okay.
now in the rearview mirror, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Right.
It definitely created an interest for me, and it also
Right.
created a whole set of knowledge. Something I didn't mention about my grandfather, as a kid, I was chasing these golf balls down. We'd literally have these enormous gunny sacks full of balls that would weigh down a car, just a couple of them. The car was riding on its rails. And we get them from various different greenskeepers of golf courses around. And then we'd sort through them and clean them up, and we'd repackage the ones that were good. And then I would go out and sell those golf balls to like my dad's friends, neighbors, anyone that would sell, play golf for, not a lot of money for like barely used balls that were all cleaned and set up. And then the ones that didn't make the cut got put back into gunny bags, and we sent them back to Chicago, where the range that he had sold to his brother would buy them, and they'd stripe them and use them on the golf range. So that's kind of my first entree into that. But something I didn't tell you about my grandfather is that, as he was having some amount of success and he was in a people business, he 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 was around a lot of people. He told me he never worked a day in his life, right? He said his job wasn't, the golf range, it was actually giving coffee to friends.
Mm.
And so we talked to a lot of people that are doing a lot of different things. And at one point, one of his customers had convinced him to make an investment in a small startup company that he knew nothing about, but he trusted the guy. And the startup company was called Teletape. It went on to become various different things, and eventually became CBS Viacom. It was bought by CBS Viacom,
Hmm.
company that he was the single largest investor in. Not even
Wow.
knowing as he did this. Went on. They produced the first Sesame Street. They did the first live sports broadcast in the country. So here's my grandfather who never got out of the eighth grade. His father was murdered in 1929, 3 months before the Depression hit.
Wow.
And he was in eighth grade, or going into eighth grade, and he got pulled out and had to go to work and support a family of five,
Mm.
brothers and sisters and his mom. So he had
Wow.
no knowledge of anything other than just how to make a buck. And now here's this dude that's sitting literally in a Manhattan boardroom, at board meetings for this publicly traded company that he had me reading. The stock quote
Yeah.
out of the Wall Street Journal to him, and hey, Grandpa, it's at 4 3/8 today. It's like, oh my God, it's up to 5 1/16. Back in the days of fractions. And
Uh-huh.
it was pretty cool, and there was meaning behind it to him, and it was a wonderful, incredible lesson for me.
So he have, is this what inspired you to go into helping others with managing their money? Because there's also a flip side to this story. There was kind of a negative element to it as well, in that he didn't really have someone who he trusted and who gave him good guidance. You want to talk about that side of it?
Yeah, so the good side of it is what got me interested in the business and why I'm doing it, and the bad side of it is why I'm doing it the way I am doing it. Um, the good side, I was in seventh grade. He took me down. He's like, "You got to meet my broker. You got to meet my broker." Understanding my grandfather was like the biggest personality in a room, right? He was that guy that you walk into a room and everyone will gravitate towards, right? They
Yeah,
wanted
kind
his
of
stories.
all the oxygen went towards him, kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
it's like I wish that I had an ounce of that. It was incredible.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen my grandfather in my entire life up to that point in seventh grade ever look up to anybody. But
Mm.
when he introduced me to his stockbroker at Dean Witter, it's like I could see the admiration that he had for this man, and just in how he addressed him and how he interacted with him and how he introduced me. And I looked at that as a seventh grade kid going, I want to do that, right?
Mm.
I want to do something that gets his attention the way this guy gets it, as opposed to everyone giving him theirs.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about also the fact that this money wasn't all that invested all that well, and why that happened.
So that's the downside of it. And it's why I do my business the way I do it today. And it's why I work only with entrepreneurs. It's because I have an understanding of what that's actually like from living it firsthand. As an entrepreneur, full well that, and I can say this too, because I am, um, we're big personalities, we're type A people, we're driven, we know everything about everything, right? Because we're forced to, just to
Hmm.
simply stay in business. And that was my grandfather, right? It's like, so it was very hard to tell him what was right. He had preconceived ideas of what he needed to do, what he needed to sell, what he needed to buy, how much of it, and so he was basically paying a guy to take his advice as opposed to the guy giving him advice.
Mm.
And again, while he was savvy in terms of, stumbling into this incredible business deal that made him a lot of money, running two businesses, he didn't know, anything about actually investing that money, right?
Hmm.
Even that investment that he made in that little startup company it wasn't made as an investment. It was made helping a guy that he believed in, right?
Hmm.
Um, so my grandfather would, tell him, well, we're going to do this, whether it made sense or not, and we're going to do that, and whether it made sense or not. He would sell at the wrong times, buy the wrong things at the wrong time, not put his portfolio in a way that was really working for him. And I saw that more so after I got in the business,
Hmm.
the remnants of what this guy had done over the course of time, and not so much what he did, it's what he didn't do. It's what he let my grandfather do. But when my grandfather retired, he was worth in today's dollars, north of $30 million. So not a small net worth. When my grandmother drew her last breath at 94, we were inside of 6 months before I was going to have to start paying her monthly expenses.
Wow.
So,
So it had all dwindled down. It had all been spent.
yeah. And again, not through any fault of the advice that he was getting, but it was really the fault of the lack of advice. He had hired a yes man, right? He had hired
Hmm.
somebody that, said, oh, absolutely, oh, you bet, we'll do that, but never shared with him the consequences or actually had the courage or the personality to stand up to him. He was more concerned about losing him as a client than he was in doing the right thing.
Mm. Oh, so painful. So then reflecting, or we're going to be skipping over some things here, but maybe I'll get back to this question. I want to know what your approach is now, being in that place of advisor to other companies, what you do when you are faced with someone like that, a client like that, or maybe you don't take them in the first place. But before we get to that, at some point, so you knew from a young age that you wanted to be an advisor like this to entrepreneurs, to give them that strategic advice, to guide them so that they don't end up spending their entire nest egg. But at some point, someone said, well, actually, if you want to do that, you should go into sales. And so you had a multi-year detour, about 5 years, where you're selling copiers.
Of all things, right?
Yeah, copiers.
I I got out of college. The first thing I did is I went to all the traditional names, in the business, because this is what I wanted to do. And all of them are like, yeah, it's great. We're going to pay you, and you're going to go to New York, and we're going to sit you there for a few months. You're going to study for your licenses, and you're going to take them, and it's going to be great, and it's a big party, super fun. And then you're going to come back, and if you look over there, there's a phone bank, and
Mm,
underneath that phone bank is a stack of, the white pages from, every single zip code in all of Southern California. And then you're going to go find clients. But we're going to give you a head start. And while you're out in New York training for your licenses, we want you to write down, every single one of these firms told me this. We want you to write down 100 names of the people closest to you that you think might have money. And those are going to be the first 100 calls that you make, and convince them to give you their money to go and run it.
mm,
Excuse me. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. And ultimately, you're asking me to sell the people that matter to me.
yeah,
And I had this epiphany. That's not what I wanted. First of all, I don't want to be in sales, right? I want to be an advisor.
yeah.
I guess at that time it was a stockbroker, right? The names have changed over the years, but I want to do this. I don't want to be a salesperson. And I realized that this was a sales job, and I'm like, I don't want to do that, So I took a job for a short period of time as just a W-2 guy settling insurance claims, and I realized that's not what I wanted to do, and I wanted to go back into this industry. And as it turns out, the first person that I partnered with in the business um, was just getting into it, and I was asking him. He was a personal friend of mine. I was asking him how he did it, and he's like, "Look," he goes, "You can be the best advisor in the world, but if you can't sell, you won't have any clients to advise.
Mm,
So you've got to learn how to sell." And he goes, the way I did it is I sold office equipment, and I would suggest you do the same thing, because you're not going to get better training at how to sell. And
mm,
if you fail and if you can't sell, it doesn't matter, right? You're just selling copiers. It's not like you were selling somebody's future.
true.
So it's a great place to wash out if you can't do it. And it's a great place if you can, that now you can translate that information and that skill set into what you want to do, in the industry that I'm now in.
Yeah, but the issue was you were pretty good at selling copiers because you got to a point where you're making $160,000 a year selling copiers. So you ended up doing it for a bunch of years.
Yeah, I wanted to do it for like a year or two max, get the skill set and then move on. And after 2 years, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm 24 years old. I'm making, 160,000 bucks a year. I'm winning trips all over the world for, quota contests. And I'm like, well, this is not a bad gig, And
Yeah.
so it took me a few more years before I got up the courage to actually leave that behind and dip my toes into the job that I'm doing now.
Sometimes that happens, right? You get kind of like a golden handcuffs type of thing where opportunities, come where you're not expecting them.
It
So,
was a fun detour.
you go from that, and then you finally get to managing money. You get to wealth management or stock brokerage, maybe it was called at the time. And what were some of the struggles with the early days of getting into this industry? Since you had the experience as a kid knowing about it through your grandfather, but it's sometimes something different when you enter the industry as a newbie.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I wear this gray fluff on my face is that for me, when I did get into the business, I looked like I was 12. And as far as challenges, and I would say this for any young man, especially, getting out of school, it's a genuine disadvantage, right? I remember the first time I sat down with a meaningful client, and her question to me was like, "Why should I give you my money? You're younger than my kids."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Well, actually, I'm not, but." Because I knew that, but it was a tough question, right? And
Yeah.
that was you get a lot of that, right? There's money. People are there's probably a bigger emotional tie to money than there is anything else in our lives, right? We'd like to think that that's not the case, right? It's our kids, it's our spouses, it's our hobbies, and that is true in terms of how we actually live our life, but how we actually behave around those things. There's My experience tells me that there's nothing that's more emotional to us than money, regardless of how we describe it or define it.
Yeah. Now, you actually started a couple different firms before you got to the model that you liked the most. Talk a little bit about what some of the previous models were and how you got to the finally the model that you like that you have with Avalan now.
So, I knew I always wanted to work with business owners, entrepreneurs, because it's just, again, that's just the cloth that I was cut from, and it's who I am. It's actually who I resonate with. Um, and I feel blessed that that's the case. I get to work with some of my, you know, people I look up to the most, and people that become some of my closest friends. um, so I knew what I wanted to do, but as you start out, you'll do anything, right? I remember the first appointment that I went on that I closed was a guy that was a maintenance guy, a maintenance worker for a local high school district. And he had me into his mobile home where I've got my beautiful little sales brochure that I'm going through, and he's got a toothless cat walking across the table, like over my presentation materials. And finally tells me, he's like, "Oh, this is your lucky day." He says, "I'm going to invest $50 a paycheck, into this thing that you're describing." And it's like, "I'm going to be your client." And I'm like, and I was so fired up about that. It was so amazing, right? It's like, I got one,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
do you do anything, right? And
Yeah.
so you spent time cutting your teeth, learning, before you tee up those other opportunities. And in my first partnership, I wound up going into business with that guy that told me to sell copiers, and we had a lot of success together. It was a lot of fun, but as you're chasing so many different things, you start to become a slave to the machine, and maybe less interested in the client themselves, the client experience itself. And we had brought in a third partner at one point to try and expand. And at that point, I realized that I thought we had lost our way,
Mm.
where, the bottom line of the company was becoming more important than the relationship with the client. And it was just more than I could take. And we had a lot of disagreements about that. And finally, I was exited from the other two. It gave me a chance to kind of reset. That's when I got to Santa Barbara. I found another guy that needed some help, and we loosely partnered together. But it was really more of an expense sharing deal. It wasn't really that we were in business together. And it was about that happened in probably 2003. And in 2010, 2008, actually, I had an opportunity to really work with the first real entrepreneur that I had met. And it was one of the coolest things ever. And it's interesting because my whole theory around, like, people needing to stand up to these you know, high A type personalities, I really believe that, and I operated that. I'm sitting with this guy who had sold his business for $1 billion. He had a
Wow.
other things going on, including taxes and a bad advisor before him, that's not what he was left with that was investable. But he wound up splitting, roughly $200 million between me and one other advisor.
Wow.
Which, by the way, that other advisor now works for me as my chief investment officer.
So you kind of got both of them eventually. Both halves.
This guy was epic, right? And he had done some really cool things. And he actually reminded me a lot of my grandfather. I really cared about that guy a lot. And we did some cool things, for a while. And this is when I was with my second and then last partner. Um, and we were sitting. I was kind of pitching him. I was taking him down to the city, into a big boardroom to show him some of our traders and some of the things that we did. And we're going down and we're talking in the car. And he turns to me and he looks at me. He's like, "You want to know why I hired you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to. That's awesome." He's like, "Because you're the first person that didn't kiss my ass." He's the first person that actually stood up to me and the crap that I was feeding you and stood your ground and held true to yourself and what you believe is right.
Mm,
Nobody ever is willing to do that to me.
mm,
And I'm like, wow, it's like I was right. This is what they need, right? It was an
yeah.
incredibly validating experience. So I worked with him for a few years, and it was kind of at that point that I realized that I really wanted to do more of that and not the traditional everyday stuff. And it was at that point that Avalan was born. So
Mhm.
I started working on opening that up in 2010, exited my relationship with that other advisor that year, and then in April of 2011, hit the ground full speed with the iteration that we are now, which, as I founded it, was solely to be an organization of financial services outfit that was basically for entrepreneurs by an entrepreneur. Um, we've certainly morphed past that now. I've got advisors that specialize in C-level people and people that do a lot of intergenerational wealth kind of stuff, and we're a very full service firm, but I've kept very true to working with business owners.
Yeah. What is so keeping to this theme of being willing to stand up to the clients and being able to speak your mind and speak truth to power, so to speak. What's the secret behind retaining the ability to do that? Is it diversifying your revenue so there isn't one client that represents too much of your business revenue? Is it just sticking to your guns? Are there any kind of secrets to, you know, maintaining that independence or whatever you want to call it so that you're always, no matter what, gonna speak up to them, frankly?
I do the best that I can in my life to come from a place of integrity. And I've always found that if you start there, that the rest of the secrets don't really matter quite as much because you ultimately always find your true north.
Hmm.
And it always seems to work out, right, one way or the other. Now, I will say along the way that diversification is important. That client that I was giving you that story about later in 2011, after I started the firm, even though he had assured me that that I was his guy and we were going to keep working together, I founded the firm to be able to service him and others like him. And he was having a little bit of guilt from being an absent dad,
Mm.
his entire life. And his kid was in his ear about needing to buy gold and do all this other stuff. And so he came to me, he's like, "Look, I want to keep working with you, but I want you to buy gold." And I looked at him and I said, "Listen," I said, "You hired me for me to do exactly what I'm going to do right now." And so I weaved a little story to him. I said, "Here's what we're going to do." Because he wanted to own the gold. He didn't want it held anywhere else. He wanted to hold it. Like, "Where are you going to hold that much gold?" He's like, "In my house. I've got a place." And I'm like, "You realize how stupid that is?"
Yeah.
And he
Okay.
just called me stupid. I'm like, "Yeah." And so I said, "I'll buy you gold." I said, "But here's the deal." So it's going to take 13 armored cars actually to deliver this
Oh,
amount,
jeez.
literally based on the weight
Jeez.
liability.
Wow.
And I said, "I want all 13 of them to come in your house at the same time. I want to have a drone above and I want to watch them converging on your house. So I want it to be kind of like that Beauty and the Beast scene where all the waiters come out and serve everybody." He's like, "You're making fun of me right now, aren't you?" And I'm like, "This is why you hired me, right?"
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
he goes, "That's why I'm going to fire you too."
Mm.
So he wanted the gold. And so
Mm.
standing up to that principle, it got me the job and it lost me the job.
Yeah.
Was to his own detriment, right? It was terrible. He wound up losing half of his net worth in the short term. I don't know.
Ugh.
I don't know if he kept it and wrote it out or not, but it was
Was that a time when gold was like really hot and it like spiked in value too? Okay,
he
so
bought
that's
it
why.
all at the peak.
Wow.
wrote it
Jeez.
all the way down. So,
Oh man.
it's like, again, you can stand up. It's hard. Our industry as a whole, right? We are yes men. We tell people what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. And it's a really difficult thing as a business owner, right, to do that
Yeah.
because oftentimes you're extracting yourself from a situation that you want to be in where you can make a difference.
Yeah.
But I think that, for me, given the experience I saw with my grandfather, the experience I had with this gentleman who I still care about dearly to this day, um, it's like going back to that living with your integrity. It's like I couldn't stand by and facilitate something that I knew would not be good for him just because
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
and so you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So yes, I have learned that integrity matters, but diversifying,
Right.
across a broader base of, maybe not quite as big a clients, is important too.
Is is it a common thing? So you mentioned like gold. Gold was hot for a period of time. There are these hot investments that come along, whether it's Bitcoin or a company or Nvidia or whatever stuff like that. Is that a lot of like you have to kind of play defense a lot with clients? I guess it depends on the client, but do you have clients coming to you like, oh, I want to buy Nvidia because they're seeing it on the news, they're seeing it on the headlines. So is that it seems like a lot of your work might be like just playing defense, like kind of like saying like, okay, calm down. It's in the headlines now because it's super valuable, which means that you shouldn't be buying it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, there's this adage that was going around. I think Warren Buffett kind of coined it in a different phrase than what I'm going to use, but especially like, excuse me, especially at the back end of the tech boom, in the late 90s. When you start getting stock advice from your gardener,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Yeah.
you know that maybe it's a little bit long in the tooth, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's happening, right? We have media sources who are purporting to understand the markets when all they are a bunch of journalism majors, that really don't know what they're talking about, or they're looking to sensationalize things, right, and make a buck on the sensationalization. We call that investment pornography, right? It's not investing. But it's an easy way because people, again, you're telling people what they want to hear, right? People want to hear that you've got that one idea, you've got that one trick. And the truth of the matter is if you do things, in a purposeful and tactical way, right? So I'm not suggesting that you go about the way a lot of our industry does it, in terms of like, you create these passive portfolios, right? That are basically you only trade them when they're out of whack. So you're actually fixing it after the damage has been done.
Mhm.
It's like, so it's not that. But our industry is made up of either that, right? Where you're never going to be outside of the market. So you're never going to get fired for underperforming because you're being the market. Or you have the other side of it, with that sensationalization, right? You got to buy Bitcoin, you got to buy gold, you got to buy Nvidia, whatever it may be. And then, being opportunistic about just getting the sale at whatever cost. And it's really, we've really worked very hard to try and take those two ends of the bookshelf and really try and squeeze it down to the middle, right? Where you've got components of both of those things, right? Because they can both work, but you have to be a little bit smarter in this side and a little bit more purposeful on the other. And when you can blend
Yeah.
those things, you wind up. Those are ways that you can end up, creating genuine alpha in an investment portfolio.
Do you find that there is a general, there's been a lot of ups and downs between COVID and the great economic recession in 2008, and Bitcoin was created, and some speculate because of distrust towards large financial institutions. Is that a challenge? Is that one of those challenges that you've had to deal with over the last 30 years? Is there trust in markets now, or what is that relationship like for your clients?
You know, wow, I can answer that question. I want to make sure I don't get myself in too much trouble.
It
There's,
was maybe a little too broad a question.
well, there's always somebody that's distrusting the market in some way, right? And I've found that more often than not, it winds up landing on where your political affiliations wind up being.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are trusting the markets today that didn't, as recently as last year.
Yeah. Okay. Because
A
of the
lot of
change
people,
in
yep.
political scenario. Yeah.
There's a lot of people that believed in the markets last year that have no trust in them this year. Um,
Interesting. Hmm.
and you
It's
know,
funny because they're different things. There's financial markets and there's political market. They're
it
totally different.
doesn't even matter, right? It
Yeah.
just we did a big study on the impact of of elections, in terms of where markets go, and there's almost zero correlation as to what you can expect. But yet that's kind of what we understand and what we know. And that's where we all live in our own echo chambers, right? And so, we listen to what resonates with us and then we respond accordingly. And so it doesn't really matter what side of the aisle you are on, but if it's the other side that's controlling things, you tend to be more skeptical of what's happening.
Sure. Yeah. What about so you're in not a big town. Santa Barbara is a beautiful town, but it's a town of about 100,000 people. Los Angeles just down the coast, San Francisco further up the coast are much bigger, metro areas. And you're building a boutique company, that has to compete with the Merrills of the world, the Charles Schwabs of the world. What has that been like building a smaller boutique company in a smaller town, and like how have you kind of differentiated yourself?
Well, Santa Barbara is a genuine anomaly to the rest of the world.
By the way, lots of wealth there, so that helps too. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Santa Barbans don't trust people that aren't Santa Barbans. I've been here since 2000 and early 2003.
So in other words, you're an outsider.
I am still an outsider. A lot of the money that comes to Santa Barbara from outside of Santa Barbara keeps relationships with their big city advisors.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And then, the others are looking for, people that are Santa Barbarans, right? But, after 23 years of being here, 22 years of being here, I've built the confidence of those around me. I'm a known entity here now, which is useful. I spent a lot of time, working with centers of influences, right, and building our business. So, most of our business, if it doesn't come from clients, existing clients, comes from the professionals that serve those clients.
Mm-hmm.
Have incredible relationships, with other financial services professionals, be it CPAs or business transaction attorneys, trust and estates attorneys, things like that. That's really how I've built the Santa Barbara practice. I still have clients that have been legacy clients from when I was doing business in the Conejo Valley. And then people move, right? So, while I started doing this, just here in my little small neck of the woods, we've got clients in over 30 states now.
Mm.
As that happens, you meet additional professionals that are serving those clients where they've gone, and you start to build up opportunities there as well. So, yes, we're boutique, and yes, we're growing, right? And it's interesting because for us, we have built a platform that could serve literally 100 times the clients that we have. Now I can't support that, but the systems and the network can. And so, instead of going off like a lot of firms our size, when they decide they want to grow and go into different markets, they'll go and acquire practices. It's not something that we've ever wanted to do because, again, going back into, staying in line with one's integrity, I don't want our culture or our view of, how genuinely we are a client first organization. Like in every single aspect of it. And it's easy to say that, but it's like, it's true. So I don't want to acquire a firm that has a different culture, and then have to integrate that culture or change that culture or have clients that are expecting different messaging. But what we're doing is we're slowly growing by acquiring people in the business like I was, right, 25 years ago that have proven that they can build a book, but are looking for someone that can support them in their own markets. And so instead of going and buying practices, we're looking at, emerging advisors in different markets, Orange County, Conejo Valley, Silicon Valley. We're looking at some folks in Texas right now and hopefully Chicago soon. And so we're looking at growing this presence by finding like-minded advisors, right, that see the world as we do, that have clients like ours that can kind of roll up into something that can support them and allow them to create their own footprint that's larger in their own market, as opposed to acquiring firms. That's kind of how we're addressing that.
Yeah. Well, Rich, this has been great. I know we're almost out of time, so I'll wrap up with my last question, which is my gratitude question. I'm a big fan of practicing gratitude and also giving our guests a little bit of space here at the end to acknowledge people that have helped them in their journey. You mentioned your grandfather. I'm sure there are others. Who would you want to shout out and thank for helping you in your journey?
So I've given that some thought since you posed that to me, when we first sat down today. And it's, my grandfather is an obvious one, right? The amount of gratitude I hold for that man is beyond. I too like to try and live in gratitude and am grateful for everything around me and the things that I get to do. And I thought about it, and I'm a member of Entrepreneurs Organization. That's where I met you. And I have a lot of gratitude for the people that I've met, in that space. For you, for example, for, introducing me to this whole world. It's incredible and it's been a lot of fun. But when I really think about where my greatest gratitude lies, it's really with the relationships that I have with my clients. I am tremendously grateful, not just for the living that I'm allowed to make for the people that I get to work with, but for the experiences that I get to share and the things that I get to learn. Because there's not a single one of my clients that doesn't teach me something along the way, that's outside of my realm of expertise. I feel like I'm so well-rounded in this world in terms of the different types of businesses and industries and things that make everything go on around us. And the gratitude that I hold for every single one of my clients that have opened up their hearts, their minds, their worlds for me to be able to learn from. It's something that's really special to me. And I appreciate you allowing me to express that.
Yeah, that was great. Rich, where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, and learn more about Avalan?
Yeah, check us out at avalanwealth.com. That's AVALAN wealth.com. I think it's a pretty comprehensive website. There's ways to find us if you want to talk more. It's kind of a fun place to kind of cruise through and see what we do. And it's a great place to check out.
And also check out the Road Already Traveled podcast on your favorite podcast player. Rich, thanks so much for your time.
John, thank you. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.